Okay, I'm going to call to order the June 19th, 2018 meeting of the Board of Commissioners in Bellingham. And start with a roll call. Commissioner Briscoe, are you with us?
No, your mic's not on.
Commissioner Briscoe, are you with us?
Yes.
Commissioner Shepard?
Here.
And Commissioner Bell, all present and accounted for. We're going to start this with our public process is for public comment. We're going to allocate about 15 minutes to this. We ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes out of respect for everybody here. Just want to reiterate 3 minutes because I know you're first up. You'll hear a bell and that'll mean your time is up, but anybody wishing to speak will be allowed. And I only see one name on the sign-up sheet, and that is Sherry.
Appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to you about the festival for September the 1st, 2018, Rock and Blues Festival. We've been very excited about this opportunity, and we're hoping to make it an annual event. I have been in contact with Lighthouse Mission. I'm wanting to benefit Lighthouse Mission. I feel there's a big need for a lot of the people in our community and with the children. I work for the Bellingham School District, so I see a lot of the children that sometimes are in situations with their families are homeless. So my heart has really been into this. I've been working on this for months. And so in March, I secured the park for the event, and I have some connections with some professional bands and also with some locals. And so it's going to be an all-day event from 2 to 10 o'clock and probably VIP at 1 in the afternoon. We were told we have to shut it down by 10. But it's going to be an amazing, I think, opportunity for this community. It will help in a lot of ways, I feel, bring the community together with music and also to benefit some of the homeless here in town that Lighthouse Mission is helping work with. So I am needing, of course, the whole park. There's going to be a large stage present on the property. I've spoke to a couple of people that do put the stages out in this area, so they're familiar with the grounds. And so I'm waiting on a couple bids for that, but I am going to get someone that is familiar with the grounds of Zuanish Park. Also, we will be having vendors, also a couple of beer gardens, and maybe more. I've been talking to Boundary Bay about that. So, any questions?
I have one.
Commissioner Briscoe?
First off, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name when you started. The microphone was kind of loud on my end here. Can you state your name for me again, please?
Jerry Ann Trammell.
In this channel. You made a comment there that you're going to need the whole park. I was under the understanding that part of the park was going to be roped off for this event. That's where we were at with this. Has something changed that we're not aware of, or are you here asking for the whole park?
I was under the impression in the very beginning that it was the whole park because the size of the stage, if the whole park is not roped off or fenced off, there will be some issues because this is going to be an event that there will be a coverage or a charge to get into the park. If the part of the park is open, then there will be people walking around that would be able to be listening to the bands, and I believe the people that are paying would not be happy with that. So in the very beginning, the receipt that I received and the paperwork said Zuanish Park with the boathouse. So there was no anything added to that about just the grassy area or just part of the park. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Shepard?
We've discussed the issue a few times before, and I think if we're going to have a vote on it, I'd like to make sure it's on our agenda so that we're able to see this as something that people can come and weigh in as well. I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
And I think as you've probably heard in previous meetings, I'm excited to have events like this.
Yes.
And I appreciate you putting in the time and effort to plan a nice event for our community. I do think we're a supportive community for these type of events.
Great. Thank you.
And I echo that. And thanks for taking the time to come down and talk to us.
Sure, thank you.
We'll find a place for you on the
Appreciate
next
it.
agenda.
Thank you so much.
Anyone else wishing to speak before the commission? Seeing none, we will close the public comment period and move on to the consent agenda.
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through K.
And we have a couple of things we'd like to discuss before we go through this. Is that okay?
Yep, please.
Commissioner Briscoe, did you have something?
I'll let you guys go ahead here. I'm having trouble getting things to come online on my end here as far as the media part of things. Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Shepherd?
So,
Yeah, I've got a question on J. This is the termination of lease settlement agreement between Northwest Native Architecture. I couldn't tell if from the agreement that was reached, it looks like the charges are for the rest of the lease term. And what happens if we fill the space prior to the lease term expiring? Is that going to change the rate? Would this individual pay less, or is the rate going to be the same?
So the amount of the settlement is a negotiated amount, and it represents half of what remained through the lease term. The lease term was through July 31, 2019. The tenant has vacated the premises, and it gives us the opportunity to get it released as soon as we possibly can.
So will the terms change if it is leased, or will before the 2019, or will the lease rate or will the payment stay the same?
It'd stay the same because it's a negotiated settlement with him. So we've agreed to let him off the hook for a certain amount, and he said, I'll pay that amount.
Okay.
So basically, we're taking on the risk that we rent it, and he's letting go of that risk.
Yeah. I mean, in this climate, we're pretty likely to be able to rent the space.
Yes.
But in other climates, this would be our security in case that didn't happen.
That's correct.
Okay. And is his business still able to be operable? Do we know?
I don't know if he is still operating. I'm having a difficult time getting him to communicate with us. The good thing is that he has vacated, and we should be able to release it quickly.
Okay. That was my only question there. Thank you.
And my question is on E. It's just, anytime we do something sole source, I want to know why we get a sole source contract.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioners. Adam Fulton, Director of Facilities. We rarely use sole source for the same precautions that you have, I assume. Very, very cautious use. However, on this one, what's going on there is we're upgrading the lights throughout Blaine Harbor, and a light unit comes with the post, arms, and fixtures. And the project was actually originally scoped to replace all three of those things, and the price was around $900,000. As we climbed into it, the posts are actually still just fine. So it was just a matter of replacing the arms and the fixtures. And you can't mix Ford and Chevy parts, kind of a thing. So we went back to the same manufacturer that makes the poles, so everything works together. And the project's going to be closer to $150,000.
No, it makes sense.
Yep.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify that you can mix Ford and Chevy parts. There's a lot of people that put some big Chevy big blocks into Ford cars. Just saying.
Isn't that what happened when they came up with Studebaker?
That's right.
You can. All right, that being said, Commissioner Briscoe, if you don't have nothing, if you.
I've got one item, if
Oh,
I
I'm
can. Sorry, item G. We'd like to pull that off the consent, add it on to the action items, because we've got a slight modification to the motion and to the change of the rules. So we'd like to cover that under action items. If that's okay, we'll add it as item number 6.
Okay.
Fine with me.
Thank you.
And I have no question.
And I have no further. That being said,
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through K, with the exception of G, to be discussed separately as an action item.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approved, unanimous. Okay, let's move on to presentations. Oh. Before you start, new jokes?
Not my presentation, so I don't want to sabotage our state auditor. Tamara Sobczak, Director of Finance. As you know, our state auditors were here for several weeks on site. They've completed their work, and they're here today to talk about what they looked at, what they found, and answer any questions that you have. So I'd like to reintroduce Julie Sterna. She was our lead this year. And I'd like to introduce Scott Hilton. He wasn't on our audit this year. He was on our audit last year, and he's actually the port specialist, so he can answer any specific questions that you have. Here you go.
Hi, my name is Julie. I'm the auditor in charge, and I'm here today to just discuss the results of the audits. The first area we looked at was the accountability audit report. We determined that the port was in compliance with applicable requirements, laws, and their own policies. It will be a clean audit report. The areas we reviewed are listed in the bullet points on the PowerPoint. We did have exit recommendations we provided to management, but these are minor best practice housekeeping recommendations. They will not be included in the audit report. The next area is the financial statement audit report. In our opinion, the financial statements are fairly presented. We'll be issuing an unmodified or clean opinion on the financial statements. For internal controls over financial reporting, we identified no significant deficiencies and no material weaknesses. For the Certificate of Achievement in Financial Reporting, because the port had a clean financial statement audit and they met the June 30th deadline, they are eligible to apply for the CAFR award. And an audit highlight is that the port has received this award for over 10 years. The last area is the passenger facility charges. We found that the port was in compliance with applicable requirements. We identified no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. We do have a few closing comments, but before I continue with those, are there any questions about the audit reports?
I have none.
No.
Okay. Just a few closing comments. The port's audit reports will be published on our website, and when your reports are released, management will receive an audit survey. We do value your opinions, and we appreciate feedback. It helps us improve our audit process. For audit cost, in the engagement letter, we estimated the cost of the audit to be $39,900. Due to efficiencies on behalf of port staff, the port will see savings of approximately $2,500. The next audit is scheduled for spring 2019, and it will include an accountability audit, financial statement audit, federal programs if applicable, passenger facility charges, and an audit of the port's Industrial Development Corporation. The estimate for the cost of the next audit is $46,000. but this is a preliminary estimate to be used as a budgeting tool. Well, that concludes the results of the audits. Are there any questions?
I have none.
How many audits a year do you do on average? You personally, or your team?
Um,
I think our team does about 155.
And out of 155 audits, if you were to take this audit for cleanliness and on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being good, how would you rate us?
well, clean audit opinions, minor exit recommendations, very clean audits.
So I'll take that as being really good. I'm
Really good.
I'm trying to pat our CFO
Yeah.
on the back here. So
It's really good. It's very clean.
I think that was a 9.4. She said.
So I just wanted to acknowledge that Tamara and her team do an excellent job, and it's actually the whole port, because our real estate staff, our human resources, everybody gets involved in this audit process, and we have a great relationship with the state auditor's office. We like to run a clean shop, and I just want to acknowledge our finance department for doing that.
Actually stole my thunder, because we being the face get the credit, but it does not belong to us in any way, shape, or form. So we really do want to acknowledge, and it does help to have an accountant as a executive director as well. I think that is not lost on any of us. But Tamara, just thank you for making us look good, and to the rest of your staff. And Shirley, thank you.
And I echo Commissioner Bell's comment.
And thank you to the state auditor's office.
You doing a victory lap?
It's joke time.
All right, moving on. We're going to move to the action items. Let's go to action item number 1.
A motion to establish a new Open Spaces 2018 capital improvement project budget line item in the amount of $9,000 to install 7 interpretive signs along the Squalicum Harbor Promenade.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Kyle Randolph. I'm the Harbor Master at Squalicum Harbor. The action item you have in front of you is for the development of a new capital project relating to the Squalicum Harbor interpretive signage project that I've been working on with the help of others, that we gave a presentation on May 1st, I believe it was. This is really just a companion to that presentation. As we were going through the process of hiring a graphic designer and seeing the 7 signs that they developed for us, were like 99% done. I don't have anything to show you today, but they look excellent. Originally, we were thinking we'd have enough money based on private donations and what we had already internally, that we'd be able to squeak out maybe 4 or 5 for this year in time for CFeast 2018. But as we started seeing those signs, we're seeing how good they were, as well as understanding there's a slight cost savings and getting more done this year in terms of both purchasing signs in a higher quantity, as well as we have to lay foundations. Those are the biggest expenses for this program, and it's a lot easier to go in and do more foundations, and the per unit cost goes down. So we figured if we've taken the ball all the way to the 2-yard line, we might as well just take it across the end zone. So we figure 7 signs will cost roughly $20,000. We have $11,000 already allocated in private donations, and so the $9,000 should give us the remainder we need to get the 7 signs done in time for CFeast 2018. And we also presented on an 8th sign. That was always intended to be done in 2019. We'll make sure that process, or that goes through the traditional budgeting process later in the fall. Do you have any questions for me? Anything I can answer?
Commissioner Shepard?
Kyle, how about, are there any significant efficiencies for purchasing enough signs to have Blaine Harbor outfitted with these as well? Or is this something we should think about for next year's budget? Because I certainly, and I think the commission probably shares interest in seeing us do the same treatment at Blaine Harbor. Because these, I think everybody's been very impressed with the way these signs look. They're going to be a great asset, and They would look nice with that new trail we're putting in around the web lockers.
Well, thank you for your comments. Certainly, the larger the quantity order you do with the sign manufacturer, the less the cost is. It is a small savings, maybe a few percent. Anything is great. We certainly can do that. I don't have those numbers available for us now, so it'd be hard to come up with what do we really need for that project, but it's certainly an option.
And Kyle, aren't you planning on putting this in the 2019 budget for Blaine?
Absolutely. We plan on, there's about 6 signs that, of the 7, that are fairly generic in that they would transfer immediately to a Blaine setting. And so it would be, our intention was to put the 8th sign that we haven't developed yet, which is on the tribal heritage, as well as potentially up to 6 signs for Blaine onto the 2019 budget process.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Commissioner
Oh,
Bristow.
yeah, I got something I'd like to mention. As long as we're discussing signs here. I think maybe I've heard from some public members, we may need to expand our signage a little bit into the wildlife area, maybe the local goings-ons of the critters and so on and so forth is something I'd kind of like to have staff explore a little bit, little more explanations of what's around the harbors other than just the businesses and the boats and so on.
Yeah, well, we agree with that. I think we'll look at that for the 2019 process. We've been privy to some of those emails from the public, and we're going to take a look at that, and we'll make some recommendations to y'all.
Very good, thank you.
Anything else?
I have nothing.
For those of you following along, the paper itinerary is a little different from the one that's online, so this would be item 4.
Yeah, I apologize. We moved it in the order, but I didn't reflect it in the agenda. So we'll just follow along and see how it goes.
So as far as an action item, nothing we need to decide. We can just,
No, there is an action. Shall I read again?
yep.
A motion to establish a new Open Spaces 2018 Capital Improvement Project budget line item in the amount of $9,000 to install 7 interpretive signs along the Squalicum Harbor Promenade.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Action item number 2.
Which on your program looks like item number 1. So this is a motion by the commission to adopt, for adoption, approval, and authorization to the executive director to implement the Port's Air Service Incentive Program for the Bellingham International Airport, or BLI.
Good afternoon, Sunil Harman, Director of Aviation. I have a brief PowerPoint presentation, looking to see if it's loaded. I apologize, I don't see it, so I'm just going to do this without the presentation. Commissioners, what you have before you is a formal policy for the port to adopt with respect to providing stimulus and incentives to airlines to provide air service at the airport. This process is prescriptive. It requires compliance with the FAA's guidebook on providing incentives. There's a distinction between incentives and subsidies. We can't outright subsidize air service. But what's occurred over the last decade or so among smaller and medium-sized airports is that there's an expectation from airlines that they want their risks minimized as they test new air service to new routes and destinations. And while it began with smaller airports that were underserved and medium city airports that felt that they could use more service, it's become basically a requirement these days. So Atlanta International Airport, arguably the largest, busiest airport in the planet, identifies certain routes that it provides incentives for. Miami International Airport targets the Pacific Rim, has no service there, provides incentives. And incentives come in various forms and combinations. Specifically, the simplest form of subsidizing, incentivizing rather than subsidizing, is to eliminate airport costs to the airline for a period of time. The FAA allows a maximum of 2 years. So this program that we have developed here is for a maximum of 2 years. But it varies with the type of service we would be pursuing. So if it's short-haul service, such as Portland, which we lost, or will be losing here with Horizon, that's a 12-month waiver of airport landing fees, as well as rental and other charges for exclusive use of spaces in the airport. There's also the ability then to sweeten those incentives a little bit with matching cooperative marketing agreements. And we have a limit of up to $150,000 a year, which again can't be paid directly to the airline. It's got to go to an advertising agency that we jointly select and create a campaign for, which would be specific to the route. The most innovative sort of incentive is a revenue guarantee, a minimum revenue guarantee. So that's on a negotiated basis with airlines, where one negotiates what the likelihood of creating a certain level of return per seat is in a city pair. And if they drop below that level, then we agree on a certain amount of incentives that would offset their losses. So we have established a maximum of $300,000 per route, irrespective of whether it's domestic or international. Those incentives are prescriptive in that not only are they negotiated, but there are some market analyses that we develop that gives it certain assurances that that route is going to be successful. Most airports need to offer revenue guarantees to have a conversation with airlines these days. It doesn't mean that we necessarily will ever use them, but it's another tool in the port's toolbox to pursue air service with carriers. The agreement can't discriminate against incumbent carriers. So if there's an existing carrier at the airport, it needs to be offered the same thing. So it's got to be an even playing field. And so we offer it to our existing carriers as well. And finally, from a cost-benefit standpoint, if an airline were to avail itself to the entire series of incentives that we would offer, including the minimum revenue guarantee, and offer three times a week service, the cost of that would be, to the airport, would be an estimated $356,000. But the economic benefit on a per-flight basis would be in excess of $2.1 million to the region. And that's based on the state of Washington's economic impact calculator. So as I looked at the calculator, the airport generates about $113 million in economic benefit to this region because of commercial air service, which is accurate because at its peak, when that analysis was done back in 2013-14, it was around $240 million. So we've lost about 45% of our market share. 113 makes sense. So each individual flight operating 3 times a week would generate about $2.4 million a year in economic benefit to the region. So there's considerable incentive to try to draw air service. And as a result, we've crafted this incentive program for you to approve and authorize the executive director to implement. And we'll see if it results in any successes. In the policy, you'll see certain cities identified. Those are the cities that we feel are cities that are underserved or unserved in the region and could benefit from from these incentives. Portland, of course, is on top as a short route, but there are some international cities that are longer haul resort cities in Mexico. So with that, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Mr. Shepherd?
Yeah, I've got a few questions. On page 1 of the incentive program, it describes the timeline for an applicant. And from my read, it sounds like the applicant has to commence a service and then they apply for the incentive.
No, it's actually, if you look at the form that we've provided, they need to submit the form in writing to the port 30 days prior to their intention to apply for the incentive. So they can plan the route well ahead of time. Many times they don't like to reveal that they're providing new service for competitive reasons, but if they want to avail themselves of the benefit, then they have to officially submit a request.
Okay, that's fine. And let's see, for the international flights, are we able to accommodate those international flights with the existing space we have, or do we have to finish out that shell of the international arrivals?
That's a good question. The level of activity that we would initially generate with international service would be relatively infrequent. A good example is a city like Cozumel, which would be seasonal. It would likely be no more than 2 or 3 times a week. And that can be accommodated with some partitioning and accommodation. We also have, as you know, international port of entry status. We have a building that's more geared towards general aviation and corporate. But it is possible to process an aircraft load of 160 passengers a couple of times a day without doing the several $1 million worth of improvement in the empty shell. I think once we get to a level of 2, 3, 4 flights a day, then we would have to make that capital investment and improvement.
Okay. And just for comparison, are there other airports that of our size in the region that are using programs like this successfully?
It depends on what level of incentive they're looking at. I mean, there are airports in our region, including Portland and others, that have successful programs in terms of waiving of airports rates and charges. I don't know of many successes with revenue guarantees. I think revenue guarantees in and of themselves have been of marginal success overall. Large airports, large communities can raise considerable purses. These can't be paid with airport revenues. They can't come out of airport operating revenues. So I don't view guarantees as being successful overall, but because the airlines have an expectation that you're walking in with something for them to consider, we thought it's important to have it in our policy.
Yeah. Well, and, whether it's a big airport or a small airport, I don't think anyone gets out without providing some sort of incentive. You shared an article with us of Vancouver, of the YVR airport. They might not be providing incentives in quite the same way, but they are spending $9 billion on their airport to improve it, to modernize it, to expand it. And I think everyone recognizes the positive benefit that this kind of air traffic has on their community, and they're willing to put in substantial money to see those be successful.
That's a good point.
Just one last question on page 5. Is there a typo in that last one that says within 30 and then in parentheses 45?
Yes,
Okay.
that is a typo.
Commissioner Briscoe, do you have anything?
No.
I've got a couple. First of all, the pilot shortage is hitting us first. And we're putting a program out that's going to help them. but they seem to be abandoning us first. And that's a kind of a thorn in my side because I travel a lot. What's your discussion with them on that and why we're the first target? I know the Portland flight's completely gone. And that used to be the last flight of the day and probably the one that I use the most. It's not that it's personal, but it is personal. I also want to ask about some of these other flights that, one in particular, when traveling from here to Canada, for example, I can't book a flight from Vancouver to anywhere else in Canada directly through, say, Alaska Airlines. There's got to be a U.S. origin in order for me to do that, which requires me to go to Seattle before I hit Vancouver, and then wherever I'm going to go. How do we get into that loop where we can go to Vancouver from here? Maybe add that to the list, or how do I make that connection into Canada before I come here? But let's go with the first one. Are they going to abandon us first, like they have been?
Well, airlines abandon airports for many, or regions that they serve for many, many reasons. And as they've consolidated, they have changed the way they operate. In the days of the past, when there were 10 major carriers, legacy network carriers, and 4 or 5 low-cost carriers, the model was that you try to grab as much of the market share as you can. And that's typical of any capitalistic system. But as they've coalesced into 4 or 5 major network carriers and a few handful of low-cost and ultra-low-cost carriers, they're much more interested in yield. So they'll actually manage capacity in a region to maximize profit. What we had here was a situation where we had a low-cost carrier that was serving a market that wasn't served by low-cost carriers out of Vancouver. So the growth that occurred here during the economic downturn was as a result of value-based customers that were crossing the border to use services that weren't available in Canada. The downturn that we've seen here, most of our traffic has been because low-cost air service is now available and proliferating north of the border. So they're actually directly competing for the same market share that we used to enjoy. Now, going to the specifics of why we lost Portland, I've been given several reasons. The pilot shortage or aircraft shortage wasn't driving the Portland. That was what we thought was driving it. What actually was occurring was that they weren't getting the yields that they wanted out of here, even with reduced fares to Portland. So unofficially, they felt that it just wasn't a profitable route, that they could allocate that equipment elsewhere and make a better return. And that was, we were doing 2 a day for a while, and even though the planes were full, they weren't getting the optimal airfare. So those seats were discounted seats. And that's the rationale for the airline pulling the service. Now, going to your question on the Vancouver, going directly, that's an international route, right? So you have bilateral agreements between nations when you do international service. We're also in a very short drive time. There isn't much of a flight time between here and Vancouver. You're looking at something comparable with air traffic control and separation issues, maybe less than 30 minutes between here and Vancouver. I don't know if that service would make sense from a market standpoint. So most people that would want to go to destinations within Canada today have options of going to Vancouver or going to Abbotsford. Abbotsford's grown considerably. They're adding a couple new low-cost carriers, which are spin-offs of WestJet and Air Canada.
So the real market thing for me is I'm thinking about what's going to drive traffic here, and I'm not convinced thoroughly that helping the airlines make more profit is going to drive more customers to our door. And I don't know. I agree completely that their models have changed. I mean, I've watched crews run in at the last minute in order to fill a plane because they're scheduled so tightly. But the way markets work is the customer has to be the one to make that choice. And I'm not sure that this incentive program brings more customers to the table. I think it gives airlines a reason to try a new market.
Yes, and that's the intent here, is to reduce their risk to almost nil in the first year and allow them to try a market that we think will be successful, and then hopefully will continue after the incentive is done.
And I think given the cities that you've chosen, you've done a great job in identifying the cities that we think are going to be the best ones to try to do that. So I'm in favor of doing this. I think what I may do is ask that we try a different approach too, to try to figure out how we can market to the customer, so they understand the value they're getting by coming here. I don't think it's always price.
No, it's not. But it's also the level of economic activity, the propensity to travel in a region. And unfortunately, as we look at statistics in the U.S., per capita, an individual travels 5.8 times a year. In this region, if you rule out the Canadian market, we're less than half of that in terms of propensity to travel. And we don't have the brutal winters that drive the snowbirds on the eastern seaboard. That might be a factor. It's a nice area, so there's no real incentive to take a vacation. Remember, we only serve discretionary markets. Seattle and Portland were our business connecting hub markets. Everything else is discretionary vacation, leisure type of flying.
Okay. Any more discussion?
I have nothing.
Well, I hope it works, because a couple of these cities are important cities, and I hope we can prove that. And I will say, just from my standpoint, I think the most important thing we can do is bring jobs to that waterfront, put a good educational facility down there, and bring people to this region, and that will open up your markets in an amazing way, because we'll bring customers to the table instead of just incentivizing the airline. So, would you mind?
A motion by the Port Commission for adoption, approval, and authorization to the Executive Director to implement the Port's Air Service Incentive Program for Bellingham International Airport, or BLI.
Commissioner Briscoe?
Aye.
Mr. Shepard?
Aye.
And I'm a reluctant aye, but I am an aye because I really do think we should try to see what we can do to bring him to the table. So I would say aye as well.
Okay, and I might interrupt at this point. I need to know where we're at in this meeting. We had, so maybe Ms. Commissioner Bell, you can explain to me, we had the presentations, and then we just kind of blew through what was supposed to be the comment period. Are we going to stop now until 5:30 and allow the public to show up and comment, or are we going to continue on?
I'd like to do one more action item because I think that'll take us to 5:30 before we take a break, if that's okay with the commission.
My point was the break was supposed to be between 5 and 5:30, and if we keep going, then we're taking a break at 5:30 when people are supposed to be commenting. So we can do whatever you guys would like to do, but I just want to make sure we have some kind of order here.
Commissioner, the break's supposed to be at 5:30. We go from 4:30 to 5:30. We break at 5:30 and then have a public comment period. That's this year's agenda. Last year's agenda was, we started our meetings at 4.
Right. I understand.
If you hit mute on your phone, you can go to the head, and we would never know.
Well, that's not my point. I've got. Well, what time do you have there? Maybe I'm confused on what time it is.
Yeah, we're at 5:15 here.
Okay. I'm an hour behind you. That's what happens there. Okay, we're good. Let's go.
Ignore that head.
My Mickey Mouse hands are different than your Mickey Mouse hands.
All right.
A motion authorizing the Executive Director to execute Amendment Number 8 to the Professional Services Agreement with Landau Associates Incorporated to provide design and permitting services at the Cornwall Avenue landfill site in the amount of $543,447 for a total authorized contract amount of $1,382,837.
Thank you, Diane. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Brian Gowron, Director of Environmental Programs. This PSA amendment with Landau Associates is related to the next phase of work at the Cornwall Avenue landfill MODCA, or Model Toxics Control Act cleanup site, which is shown here on the figure. And I'll talk about this figure just a little bit more in a moment. But it is being conducted under a consent decree with the Department of Ecology, the Port, the City of Bellingham, and the Department of Natural Resources. And it's adjacent to the R.G. Haley cleanup site as well. So shown on this figure here, as you most commonly referenced as the area with the white tarps, that is the Cornwall Avenue landfill, the former municipal waste facility for the city garbage collection. And from the 1950s or so on, for about 10 years, that was operated as the municipal waste landfill for the city of Bellingham. And since approximately 1996 or so, we've been working with the Department of Ecology on the cleanup efforts for that project, and we've made significant progress since that time. We've completed an RIFS, or Remedial Investigation and Feasibility Study. We did complete an interim action at this site where we took the Gate 3 dredge material and placed that on the upland, which is the material that's underneath those white tarps. That was done as an interim action prior to the completion of the final RIFS. We've completed a cleanup action plan and a consent decree, which we're operating under now. And then we've also completed an engineering and design report, which is the preliminary design components that describe that cleanup, as well as an early action under the consent decree where we took a significant amount of material from the former, where All American Marine is now sitting. There was some fill material there, which we took over to the landfill as a preliminary capping effort as under the cleanup plan there as well. So just in a quick summary of what the actual cleanup for this area is, it consists of an upland multi-layered cap to prevent surface water and rainwater infiltration into the landfill. It's a low permeability soil and a geomembrane liner topped with topsoil. And then there's a landfill gas collection and venting system that will be underneath that cap. That's the upland cleanup components. And then on the in-water side of things, along the shoreline, we have a shoreline stabilization system, which is also multi-layers. It's designed to reduce erosion of the landfill, further erosion of the landfill into the bay. And then a shallow subtidal capping and natural enhancement or natural recovery enhancement layer that's out in the deeper subtidal areas. So the scope of work associated with this is to take us into detailed design. Like I said, we've completed an engineering design report, which is a preliminary engineering work that's required as a deliverable under the consent decree. With the finalization and approval of that document, our next deliverable to Ecology that's required is a 90% construction, almost construction level design. And this scope of work takes us into that detailed engineering and design work, builds upon the engineering and design report we've already completed. It also has significant amount of coordination with the city, Department of Natural Resources, Department of Ecology, and the permitting agencies. Primarily, two main components of coordination. One is with the R.G. Haley site, which is over on the left-hand side here. We can maybe show these here. This is kind of the R.G. Haley site. It does come out into the bay a bit here, whereas the Cornwall Avenue landfill kind of overlaps here. Is the annotator not on? Okay, I get it. I'm not seeing annotate. It's because it's on the teleconference. Okay, so this annotator might not work. So I think that won't work either. I can just talk to it with the mic pointer here. Thanks, though. On the left-hand side here is the R.G. Haley site, which is a former wood treatment facility, kind of highlighted here with my pointer. On the right-hand side is the Cornwall Avenue landfill. There is overlap between those two sites where some of the wood treatment chemicals have come onto the landfill. Some of the landfill refuse has gone onto the Haley site. And so the coordination of those two sites in Department of Ecology's eyes and the city and port all agree that in order to not preclude or impact the design and cleanup of either one of those sites, the coordination of those two projects really need to be done collaboratively and well coordinated. And then in addition to that, the other element of coordination is that due to the shoreline stabilization system here, we have a significant impact to the subtidal area with armoring of the shoreline to prevent erosion. There are eelgrass beds all throughout there that we will potentially impact. So the permitting portions of this, when we submit a JARPA, a Joint Aquatic permit application to the resource agencies is going to require a lot of upfront work with those agencies to make sure that any mitigation requirements that we may have due to those impacts from the construction of this or the design of this are addressed and adequately mitigated. So there's a lot of upfront coordination with that. Then the permitting side of this work is also going to be very complex due to that interface with the resource impacts that may come through that project. So this is funded, however, through an existing MODCA remedial action grant and our AIG insurance policy. And staff does recommend approval primarily for the fact that this is really part of our strategy to make shovel-ready projects to prioritize our grant funding for actual construction of the project. And it does fit within the approximation of about a 10% design level effort, even though it's a high dollar amount. This is the overall contract. It does fit within kind of that range of what you'd expect for design and engineering on a $10 to $12 million construction project. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have none.
Mr. Shepard?
How does the amount that we're contributing compare to what the city of Bellingham or the DNR is contributing?
So we have an interlocal agreement with the city on this one. We also have an interagency agreement with the Department of Natural Resources. So the contributions of this, with the grant funding and then the AIG insurance policy, and then you add those layers onto it as well. It's a little complex to explain, but the settlement we have or the agreement we have with the Department of Natural Resources is that as their contribution, that we will not have any charges for the placement of capping material within state-owned aquatic lands. Typically, for any improvement, including capping, there would be a charge for the placement of that material. So they've waived those charges for a period of over 30 years. Then our agreement with the city of Bellingham is we have an interlocal agreement that breaks up our kind of percentages of contributions depending on how we come along on the overall cleanup cost. And we have exceeded the initial estimated cost, and so we're into a 75% city share due to the fact that it was primarily a city landfill, and a 25% port share, although that is post-grants and post-AIG. So we are working under kind of whatever the residual amounts are that aren't covered by grants or the AIG insurance policy are broken up in that 75-25%.
And are all these revisions on pages 10 and 11, are all of these just new revised estimates in terms of the existing scope of work, or are these new requirements, new asks that were?
Oh.
Because
So
a lot of these, some of them are minor, but some of them are big jumps.
Yeah, no, that's right. These are significant level of effort here, and these are all newly required next steps to go from the engineering design report into the detailed construction level design.
Okay, so we're not just having cost overruns here.
No.
We're seeing new implementation.
That's correct. Yeah, and then we've scoped these projects intentionally like that. So we have actually our original proposal was to take us even further. But there was a lot of unknowns what might come out of the permitting, so we actually dialed this back just to be in a manageable chunk for what we know we can accomplish that's going to be required to satisfy ecology requirements. But this is not going back and fixing something that went over in a previous task or anything like that. This is all new work that'll have new deliverables associated with it.
And my last, are we going to see any public beach type access? I know it's challenging with the soils that exist there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is an interesting site because although this is exclusively for the cleanup elements, the city of Bellingham has already completed a master plan for the future park that will go on top of this cleanup, and we've done those in conjunction. We had our consultants and myself and others that are involved in the cleanup involved in the master plan for that land use decision, and the park master plan does have a public access type of beach over on the south end here. As well as some potential pocket beaches throughout these areas where you could feasibly do it. This design does accommodate that. It doesn't necessarily build all of those elements. Some of those elements will be built by the park, similar to what we've done out here with the Waypoint Park, where we completed the Whatcom Waterway cleanup. The city's now built the park, and that beach was constructed at that point. Here, we tried to do a little bit better job of anticipating what the park design is going to be, and build that into our at least to make sure we can accommodate, not have to come back and do something different with the park. So the cleanup should accommodate those. So how that's actually going to get built to be determined, but yes, it is anticipated there will be some public access beaches there.
Okay, that's it for me.
Yeah, I don't have much. I think this is a great plan, and I think it's better to get this done sooner rather than later because it has to be done.
Yeah.
We don't have a choice. And this looks like a very thorough proposal, so I'm completely in support.
Great.
That's it.
A motion authorizing the executive director to execute Amendment Number 8 to the professional services agreement with Landau Associates Incorporated to provide design and permitting services at the Cornwall Avenue landfill site in the amount of $543,447 for a total authorized contract amount of $1,382,837. Let's do
Sorry.
that again. $1,382,837.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I've got one real quick question on the landfill gas.
Oh.
Is there any ability to recover costs from, or any hope that there will be significant enough generation that we could recoup some costs from that?
You know, we looked into that, and actually, the landfill gas generation is pretty nominal at this point. I mean, this is a pretty old landfill. There's enough that because of the land use associated with the park and other factors, we put in anticipate a passive venting system with maybe some treatment. We actually don't even need to do any treatment, but it could be retrofitted to have a little bit of treatment on it. It's just the generation is really relatively low. We are looking at the Roeder Avenue landfill, which is part of where the F Street warehouse is at. When we get to that stage, that's a younger landfill, and the gas generation is a little bit different. So we may look at that as some kind of opportunity to generate power off of that and recoup some costs.
This just didn't yield enough.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Commissioners.
Okay, I need to break in again here because I don't think I got my point across last time. Unless I have the wrong agenda in front of me, everything we're speaking to is supposed to be after the 5:30 public comment period, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and generally the commission decided we're going to continue the meeting on past that point and not allow the public to be there to comment on these action items. So I want to make clear what we're doing.
Fair enough, and I think at this point, we will take a 10-minute break and reconvene after at 25 minutes till. And we will make that clear if anybody has any comments on the action items that we've taken already. Thank you, Commissioner Briscoe.
Yep.
We will take a small recess, reconvene. Let's make it 20 till, reconvene at 20 till.
Very
And
good.
Commissioner Briscoe, you will call back in then?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. When we reconvene the Tuesday, June 19th Board of Bellingham Commissioner meeting, we come to a public comment period. We would like to let the public know that we did take action on action items prior to the public comment period. If anybody wishes to speak on that, we would love to hear it.
We don't currently have anyone signed up.
Anybody wish to speak to the commission, have anything? Okay, that being said, we'll move to the next action item.
Authorize the executive director to execute a contract with RAM Construction General Contractors, LLC, or RAM, of Bellingham, Washington, for the earthwork for franchise utilities for Granary and Laurel A. Street project in the amount of $483,247.59, plus a 20% contingency for a total authorized contract amount of $580,000.
Good afternoon. Brian Keenan, project engineer. Let's see here. I've got a quick presentation. There we go. So you're probably familiar with the city's road project that's underway, Granary Avenue and Laurel Street. So I'll go through a little bit of background here and then describe basically this phase of the work, and then wrap up with a quick summary and questions if you have any. So franchise utilities, also called dry utilities, it's all in this case, all underground utilities. We've got electrical, natural gas, port fiber conduits, Comcast and CenturyLink telecommunication conduits. In this case, all the main lines are installed in the right-of-way, and we've got vaults installed on private property with easements. And that's typical for these types of infrastructure. First phase, which was completed in March 2018. Let's see if this works here. If you can follow my cursor here. So the first phase connected basically the corner of Central Avenue, came down Roeder a short distance, and into the site about 1,150 feet. And that followed the city's road, phase one of the road project. The second phase will continue from the end of phase one. It'll continue down Granary Avenue and then south towards Cornwall Avenue. So there's an older shot at the end of March here of a snapshot during the phase one installation. So the city's phase one is underway, public utilities installed, and paving is underway, as you've probably seen at the site. The franchise and utilities were installed along the Granary side, or the right side in this photograph here, at which point they crossed the road and were on the left side heading towards Laurel Street here.
So those public utilities are sewer and water?
Water, sewer, there's raw water or irrigation water, there's fire water, storm and sewer, yeah. Yep.
What about our
I'm sorry?
pipes? They went in the ground there too, our pipe system for the district energy?
Oh, district energy? That's a separate project, and that's in Laurel Street only. That work is underway as of today.
Okay, so that's off to the side or something, or?
I'm sorry, can you repeat
It's
that?
in the Laurel Street right-of-way, Commissioner, and the Laurel Street right-of-way then allows us to access the rest of the site through the properties, not under Granary, but through the undeveloped or the unimproved portions.
Okay, so it's laid alongside the road, basically, and outside the sidewalk?
Correct. And then we also have some conduit in there for fiber for broadband tech as well that go follow the roads.
Okay, so that's off to the side.
No, those are
Very good.
separate projects from this one.
Okay.
Okay, so the second phase, which we're seeking authorization on this evening, is, as I described earlier, continuing down Granary Avenue, down Laurel Street to Cornwall. It's about 2,700 linear feet of trenching. And again, this is following the city's road phasing of the road construction project. It's primarily earthwork, so trenching. They open up a trench. The utility installers come and install the conduits and the different lines. Then this contractor will put that trench back to grade. So that's really the gist of this work.
So quick question on the conduits.
Sure.
Are you leaving open conduits for future growth?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, each of the utilities have provided. Puget Sound Energy, for example, has kind of the primary conduits and backup or secondary conduits in the event that that those additional conduits are needed.
And do they own those, or are they?
Yes, they own and operate those conduits.
Do we have any that are not dedicated to somebody else in case something else comes along that we may?
Oh, I apologize. You're asking about port-owned conduits?
Yeah, or just a separate conduit that may not belong to another vendor for future.
Yeah, so the port conduits for fiber, those include 4 2-inch conduits. So we do have some, we do, yeah. Yep, good question. Let's see, so included in this work, there's a utility farm that'll be located near north of the railroad tracks. If I go back to the figure here. That's this area here, if you can see my cursor. And that's where, so like I said, all the work here is underground utilities, but we do have above ground installations. And that was all located in this area here. So there's part of that is the city's utility appurtenances, and we have for the franchise utilities located westerly of the city's easement there. Point being that you won't see above ground installations along the rights of way here. Let's see. The utilities will become activated once they're connected back to Cornwall Avenue and the utility farm. And so I know folks have been interested in when the utilities will be live. And so that's kind of the sequence of that becoming so. Let's see. As you're aware, we're under this contract. We're just adding the dry utilities. That's all to facilitate and promote development of the site. Scope includes infrastructure and connection points for expansion. I guess coming back to your question earlier. So here's a more recent photo down Laurel Street. And this is facing Cornwall Avenue. You have the board mill on the right, the alcohol plant on the left. And in this case, the franchise utilities will be closer to the board mill side of the road here. And at this point, with this work ready to start, the city's public utilities are already installed. Let's see, so to wrap up the second phase, we went out to a formal bid. Ram Construction was a successful bidder. Bid amount is $483,240, including sales tax. If approved, we can begin construction immediately following contracting. We expect the work to be completed within about a month. So we're recommending the execution of the contract, as Diane mentioned earlier, for a total authorized contract amount of $580,000, and that includes a 20% contingency. Any questions?
I have none.
I have none.
Authorize the executive director to execute a contract with Ram Construction General Contractors, LLC of Bellingham, Washington for the earthwork for franchise utilities for Granary and Laurel A Street project in the amount of $483,247.59, plus a 20% contingency for a total authorized contract amount of $580,000.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Can we get this started by, say, 6 o'clock?
I can try.
10 minutes. The sooner the better is my point.
Yeah, that's what we're going for.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
A motion to approve the fourth modification of the lease between the Port of Bellingham and Grand Camp International LLC.
Good evening, Commissioners. Chris Clark, Marine Terminal Business Development Manager. We'd like to ask if you could please consider approval of the fourth modification of the lease between the Port of Bellingham and Grand Camp International. This modification amends the terms of the lease to reduce the property Grand Camp leases from the port from 8 acres to 2 acres. With a very successful loading of the African egret last month, Grand Camp is taking a break from the international export of softwood logs to focus on domestic sales of hardwood logs. They would like to continue to use the Bellingham Shipping Terminal to load these domestic cargoes into barges. However, with the modification, their land needs have been reduced accordingly. We would like to emphasize, however, that once the price of export logs becomes more competitive, Grand Camp may consider re-entering this trade and may request expansion at some point in the near future. We would also like to point out that Kathea, Grand Camp's buyer, was very impressed with what we did here in May, and as opportunities arise, is eager to source more cargoes locally and use the shipping terminal and our partners in Local 7 of the ILWU for further vessel loadings. Any questions?
Commissioner
I
Briscoe?
have a couple.
Yes, sir.
Okay, during Grand Camp's waiting to get enough timber for the vessel. By the way, thanks to ILW 7 for the great job in getting that vessel out of here, and the port crew for making things happen over there. During Grand Camp's previous lease here, they shuffled a lot of timber onto the property and shuffled a lot of timber off to the local mills, which is good. I'm good with that. What I don't want to happen here, maybe you can get an answer, is that we become a storage yard and the logs get shuffled down there and get shuffled off here and there, but they're not using our terminal facility and we're not making any money off of that. I don't want to be a storage yard. So,
Well, no, understood, Commissioner. Mr. Grandorf's plan is to, again, focus on the domestic market and then barge the hardwood logs to Port Angeles. And he's done that a couple of times over the past few months prior to the African egret loading. And he does plan on doing that again, I believe, next month, Dave, is that right? Next week. So he's got to refine his business plan over time, and he sort of reached a point where his emphasis is on bringing in logs, in this case hardwood logs, storing them until he has enough to economically put on a barge to send them over to Port Angeles. So I don't think he has any intention to truck them out or leave them there for long-term storage.
what's our revenue roughly off a barge load of logs that goes across our dock and out of here?
Revenue on barge, Dave, we figure about $12,000 for the use of the facilities. That doesn't include, of course, the wages that are paid to Local 7 for the loading of the barge.
Okay, so if it was about $12,000 for the barge, you put the load logs there and out it goes, but doesn't count for labor, correct?
For the use of the facilities, that's correct.
Okay. Now, that's not part of the ground lease, that's just the dock usage, correct?
That's correct, yes. That's separate from what he pays for the lease.
And does he have a projected number of barges per month or per 4 months or 6 months or?
Well, has he given, no, at this point, no. We just have to look at his past record over the past few months where he's done an average of about one every 45 days or so.
Okay. So one every couple months is what we can figure in.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
I have nothing. Glad to have a customer. Okay.
A motion to approve the fourth modification of the lease between the Port of Bellingham and Grand Camp International LLC.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you. And by the way, they raved about the way we ran that place, so to all of you, Dave included, this was we showed a good face to our customer.
Yeah, we're very pleased with, again, the work of Local 7 and the port employees. And so, I mean, we had compliments from the ship owner and from Grand Camp and from his buyer. And frankly, they said that this is actually the best port they've seen on the West Coast for the loading of logs. So, and that was our first outing in a while. So
Great.
it's only up from there.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
You guys make us look good.
Commissioners, I think we've covered all 5 action items. We did move consent item G onto the action item, and that's the remaining item left on our agenda today.
A motion to adopt Resolution 1374, establishing a new policy for mobile and over-the-dock fueling, and approve a new license to operate agreement for the mobile and over-the-dock fuelers.
Good afternoon, Commission. Thank you for pulling this item off of the consent agenda and so that we can make an amendment to the motion and a small change on the resolution. We thought we had it all buttoned up, and about 4 o'clock this afternoon, it was brought to our attention that while we had a small error in verbiage, it creates a big error against regulation. So what I'd like to do is amend the motion as written, but delete in item number 5 of the resolution, second line, delete the words "of a volume of 1 quart US or greater," so that it reads, "Upon release of discharge of any petroleum product onto port property or into the water," then the phone calls will be made. According to regulations, there is no 1 quart regulation, technically, if it's even a drop. We'd like to amend the motion to accept with that change. And as this was on the consent agenda, I didn't have a presentation available, but I can save you from the talk, or I can give you a presentation. We have Pam Taft here who can answer any questions that you might have.
I have no. Commissioner Briscoe?
Yeah, I just have one question, and I was going to ask this earlier. All of our fuelers are good with this. I mean, everything is they've been talked to, and everybody's on board.
We have not. We've alluded to it with a few of the fuelers. We were taking a look at this, that this is really consolidating 3 or 4 agreements into one agreement. It lays out where the fueling areas are much more consistently and clear, and it puts all 3 of them on the same playing fields. They were all operating under different versions of different hold harmless agreements and other use authorizations. So it's really a better product for all folks, and we will roll this out and talk with them pending approval of the Commission.
So clarify this for me then. You're wanting approval of this, and these will be the new rules that the port puts forward to these people, and they have not read or been they haven't sat down and discussed this with the port.
I don't believe there's anything more restrictive in these rules for them. So, had we thought this was damaging to them or they would have an objection to it, we probably would have approached them. But, Commissioner, we believe that we're making business easier for them, and we'd like your approval to go talk to them about it.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. I have no more questions.
I have no questions. No, listen.
A motion to adopt Resolution 1374 as amended with the change in item 5 as requested, establishing a new policy for mobile and over-the-dock fueling, and approve a new license to operate agreement for the mobile and over-the-dock fuelers.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion. And it appears that we have come to the end of our meeting. I would like to, before we go to other business, I'm going to announce the next Marina Advisory Committee, which is Tuesday, September 11th, 6 p.m. in the Harbor Center building. The Technical Airport Advisory Committee is Thursday, August 16th at 9:30 a.m. in the ARF conference room. on Bakerview, and the Bellingham International Airport Advisory Committee is Thursday, August 16th at 5 p.m. in the very same conference room on Bakerview. With that, any other business, commissioners? So I'll start with you, Commissioner Shepard.
I don't have any.
Commissioner Briscoe?
Yeah, I do. One thing. It has to do with our meetings. Seems like we're kind of ramming things through here. We've made some mistakes in the last couple of meetings, and then tonight we just breezed right on through our time we were supposed to take off and allow public to come in, although nobody was here, fortunately, to comment. But we need to decide what we're going to do here. If we're not going to follow the agenda that's printed, then we need to do it printed differently so people know. I mean, we have an agenda for a reason. It's to follow it. I understand when, we run short on the front end, if we want to move some things forward, maybe the correct thing to do would have been move the other business forward, do this, and then take a break. But I'm not very comfortable with the fact that we went right through the period into the action items without even a discussion amongst the commissioners whether to move forward to do that or not. So I think we need to get some clarity on how we're going to run these meetings, if we're going to run them through the agenda or not, because we're going to lose the trust of the people and we're going to lose transparency here, and I don't want to do that. We have an obligation to the people that elected us here to spend a little time doing this, and it seems like everybody is in a big hurry to get out of here and get it over with, and I'm not there with that. I want to do things right. I want to stick to our agendas, and I understand sometimes we don't have things to do, and it takes a little more time, but that's just kind of the way it is. So I don't know how my other fellow commissioners feel about that, but I'd like to get back on track with our agendas and sticking to them unless we agree to change it amongst the three of us, and we did not do that this evening. So I was that's when I was trying to figure out what we were doing and where we were at with this. We just kind of blew through things. So that's kind of what I wanted to discuss. And if we want to change things, we can do that. Or we can, there was reasons we have that 5:30 public comment period, and that's for people that work an 8 to 5 job and don't get off 5. It gives them time to get here to comment. And when you take action on 3 items before they have a chance to speak on them, I'm not very comfortable with, they can talk afterwards. Well, we already voted on it. So I'm not very comfortable with that. And I just wanted to put that forward because it's the only time we have to speak about it. But I think we need to address it.
So, Commissioner, it's been pretty common practice this year to move items above that break line. If we have a block of time there, rather than taking a longer break, we've been moving a couple action items up there. Maybe it needs more discussion each time before we do it. Maybe the three of you need to quickly, converse about that. But from my perspective, we need to have some flexibility in the agenda to move these action items around. Otherwise, we have these big, awkward gaps of time.
And
I understand that, Rob. And as you spoke to, every time we've done it, since the first of the year, there's been just a short discussion amongst us, and yeah, that's okay, let's move this ahead. Tonight, that didn't happen.
Fair enough. I understand.
Yeah, that's my fault. I did not make that conversation. I did not have that conversation before we went forward. But in my defense, we have been moving these items upward in the agenda when we've had time. It's just that you've been there on my right-hand side to ask for permission. I did not do it this time, and I apologize for that. Do you have a problem with that in general and want to make a change, or do you just want us to ask the question before we move forward?
That is the first step we should take. And, maybe we need to adjust times a little bit, I don't know. Or maybe when we don't feel, when the agenda is being set up and we don't feel that there's enough for presentations or whatever before 5:30, maybe we need to move a couple of action items up in front of that, and that's fine because it's on the agenda and people are aware of it. But this habit we're getting into of moving stuff up on the agenda and not with the public's unawareness of it, I don't think is right. And I don't have a problem moving stuff forward when you're setting the agenda if you think you need some more stuff to fill that timescape, as long as people know that that's being done. That's I'm fine with the times. I just want to make sure that the people that we work for have the opportunity to speak if they wish to on something.
Yeah, Commissioner, that's an excellent point. We do, with the unknown, I can predict the agenda items for the most part, plus or minus about 10% in time. The unknown here is the public comment. Sometimes we get public comment that drags on for 30 minutes, and sometimes, like today, we get it for 3 minutes. That's where we struggle with setting all the items before. And today we have an extra gap of time because we didn't have much public comment. That's the one we can't predict. That's the unknown.
Well, I know, Rob. I know, but sometimes we may have to give up a little time we don't want to just to make sure we do things right.
Yeah, I think, having for those action items to really make the 5:30 time slot meaningful for public comment, that those action items should happen after it. If we're going to keep public comment period there, I think we should really try and keep those action items following. It leads to some awkward breaks. I'm not sure what the next best solution is.
It's hard to make a solution. I mean, if there's a time frame, and sometimes we don't have enough time to get it done. I mean, as Director Fick said, it's hard to predict. It's all over the board. But we do have a process we need to follow, and when you set an agenda, it needs to be followed unless the three of us agree to change it. And maybe the folks that are watching these or watch them later can call in and give us some ideas. But I certainly want to make sure that we give the public their chance to speak, and to allow someone to speak after we voted on it is not a very good deal.
I also agree with you, Commissioner Briscoe. We do have it on the agenda, and public comment is one of those things that is important, and it wouldn't kill us to take a 20-minute break at 10 after if we've got something on the agenda. So we'll observe that more closely. Thank you for being the conscience of this Port Commission.
Well, you're welcome. I just like to point things out before we get our feet in a bucket of hot water.
You've never been shy about that.
Okay, gentlemen, other than that, I have nothing. Thank you for listening to me complain.
Any other business? I have one item. Port of Bellingham last night put on one heck of a display.
Oh, yeah.
We took on the Port of Everett in a softball game, and it was epic. I just want you to know that the only team to put two players face down in the dirt were the Everett team, because they couldn't even get off home plate to make it to first base. I don't want to rub it in their face, but Mr. Carter, you are the one that called us out. Secondly, the score was...
You know we're on YouTube worldwide, okay? You know that, don't you?
Yeah, I do. The score was also 27-7, and that doesn't begin to tell you how well we were playing. We were clicking on all 8 Ford and Chevy parts. I will say.
Peter Breaker was running on 12. Is that what you're saying?
Well. And I will say that we were short on some Chevy parts because we did not have enough females representation from the Port of Bellingham. And so this is a nationwide call out to all Port of Bellingham employees that we need a few more females to join the softball team, because our next target, I think, is going to be the city of Bellingham. We're feeling that good. But it was one heck of a show last night. It was a great time. I wish you could have all been there. With that, I think meeting is adjourned.
Kudos to the softball team.
Thanks, Commissioners.